it's not really very well regarded. COBOL. That's kind of offensive, right? Say Java's COBOL. Because this is what people think about COBOL. I like this quote from Charles Petzold, who wrote the wonderful Programming Windows 3.1 book. COBOL has almost no fervent enthusiasts. As a programming tool, it has roughly the sex appeal of a wrench. Now, that said, wrenches are useful. These wrenches are very COBOL-like. They're enormous. They're iron, big iron, and they're old and rusty. And they're actually mill wrenches. They're used to turn stuff in mills. I don't know. The picture said they were mill wrenches. But they're these enormous wrenches for doing things that I don't understand how to do, which is, I think, how a lot of us feel about COBOL, actually. It's not only is it not well regarded, though, no one really cares for COBOL. It's also openly mocked. I think a lot of people have heard this. I first heard this joke in the 80s. It has been going around forever. In the 80s, you know when COBOL died? Still dying. Of course, these sorts of things are true of Java as well. Now I have a problem factory. And an abstract problem factory manager. Can you guys see that okay? Yes. It kind of fades out for me. I just love that animation. It's just like, what is he doing? Does anyone remember what episode this is from? I have no recollection. The other ways that Java and COBOL are similar is that they have the same customers. You can't do something like this without a Dilbert joke, right? This is my favorite Dilbert comic of all time. My wife even gets this joke. She doesn't know anything about databases or SQL or anything, but she knows they're not mauve. And she knows that mauve has nothing to do with RAM. So, COBOL and Java, they're used in a lot of the same kind of places, big enterprisey places, right? They had COBOL, and then Java came along and filled that same role, automating their business processes. Not only are they kind of treated in the similar fashions by the users, and not only are they used by the same customers, but the companies that own them, Oracle and IBM, not that IBM owns COBOL, but they were the big vendor for COBOL. They kind of treat them the same way, right? We're not really trying to innovate here, but there's a lot of money to be made off these things. Nothing wrong with making money, but there's a lot of parallels. However, the most interesting parallel is architecturally speaking. How you implement applications with COBOL. They tend to be the same. So I'm going to use a simple application. It's a contact validator. So the contact's got a name, it's got an address, it's got a couple of phone numbers. And the application, really more of a library that we're going to develop, is going to be basically take this contact and then tell you whether it's valid or not, right? Simple problem. The criteria for the validation doesn't really matter that much. Suffice to say name is required, phone numbers must be numbers, that kind of stuff. So what's this look like in Java? Well, here's a class diagram. Excuse me a second here while I make it big enough so I can see the slides too. So here we've got the contact validator class. And he has a function called validate, which takes a contact and returns a Boolean. And the contract validator has an address validator and a phone validator, which look very similar. This is the code. This is the functionality. Java, as it turns out, as you who program in Java know, and those who program in C# would recognize as well, is made up of classes. That's the main module of code. And my experience with classes is that classes are nouns, and they're usually nouns that end in ER or OR. That's not necessarily how it's intended to be. That's not object-oriented, but that's what I tend to see, because they're not being treated as nouns. They're really verbs with a noun ending. So classes tend to be blocks of code. That's how we tend to write Java. They typically have a single entry point. In this case, it's validate. Oftentimes, it's execute, or run, or invoke, or whatever the verb that preceded the ER or OR was. And if you have any pride at all, when you write your Java code, you take that 300-line method and at least break it up into some helper functions to try and make your code a little more readable. This is how we build Java code. This is how it's structured. Here's a COBOL system diagram. Notice any differences? They're all cosmetic. It's like, well, I made them boxes so it felt older. Rounders are so, Web 2.0. And they're all uppercase. But other than that, it's pretty much the same design. I've got a program called Contact Validator. I have a program called Address Validator, and I have a program called Phone Validator. COBOL has programs. They take stuff in, they return stuff. This is just like a class with one function. It takes something in and returns something. And you can also not have a 300-line run-on paragraph in COBOL. You can break it into subparagraphs. And that's a good practice. They don't call them functions, they call them paragraphs. They're a little different. What about the data?